Hi and welcome. You're listening to Historic Huguenot Street's weekly program on WFNP The Edge, where we discuss regional New Paltz history and upcoming programs and events. I'm Kaitlin Gallucci, and I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications at Historic Huguenot Street, which is a nonprofit 10-acre National Historic Landmark District dedicated to preserving historic buildings, artifacts, and manuscripts, and promoting the stories of the Huguenot Street families who founded New Paltz. As we mentioned during our last show, we are building a wigwam on Huguenot Street. A wigwam is a dome-shaped traditional Native American structure that likely would have been used by the indigenous people in our region, the Munsee, for thousands of years prior to European settlement. Today, despite suffering multiple forced removals from their homelands, Munsee people continue to thrive at several federally recognized Indian nations in Oklahoma, Wisconsin, and Canada. The wigwam will serve as an ongoing testament to the Munsee people and will be incorporated into our guided tours beginning May 6th. Speaking of tours, right now I'm joined by guest experience coordinator Courtney Russo to talk a bit about what's new on our tours this year. Hi, Courtney.
Hi, Kaitlin.
Thanks for joining me.
No problem. Happy to be here.
So there's a lot involved to ensure historical accuracy, and especially when we're talking about these typically underrepresented groups' sensitivity in our interpretations. So first, can you tell me a bit about the process for developing and, in this case, updating Historic Huguenot Street's guided tours?
Absolutely. So, in 2016, it was the first time that the tour was the full story. So that was a really lengthy process in making sure that, each home was displayed in the best possible way, in the most historically accurate possible way, like you were talking about. So with this year, we took that information, and not only did we revisit some of the things that weren't going to change, because we want to remain as historically accurate as possible, and despite what people may think about history is dead and nothing changes, history does change.
Yeah, we seem to learn new things a lot.
We do.
It's funny to consider them new things, considering they're not new. They're very old, but they're new to us.
Yes, exactly. One of the things that we say in, let's say, the Bevere Elting House cellar, the outside blue and yellow sign that is outside of that house.
Right.
One of the last sentences on that sign literally says, "This house has an interesting subcellar." So people always ask about it when we go into the cellar space. Yeah. And they say, was this cellar always here? Or, a question like that. And my best answer is that the earliest evidence that I personally have found, so if anyone's out there and can prove me wrong, I would love to hear it.
Yeah, come on down.
The earliest evidence I have seen is that sign that that subcellar was even there.
Okay. So as of 1930, whenever, we were aware.
Exactly. And so...
there's no written documents that are
yes,
built a subcellar today.
Exactly.
Or can't wait to add that to my house. Yeah.
Right. And that addition would have been built in about 1735. That's 200 years in between that we don't know when that's put in. Mm-hmm. And so, that there's a lot of that updating and keeping current that we did on our tour this year for 2017. Mm-hmm. And then as we went through to add the new stuff, trying to take the most recent research, within the last couple of years. One of the books that we used for the majority of writing our tour last year in 2016 was a book by Paula Wheeler Carlo. Mm-hmm. That book was actually written in about 2005, I believe. Mm-hmm. So, within the last 12 years, research has changed. Yeah. And while that book is amazing and it's helped us, form a lot of our stories here and give us some background knowledge, there's even more being done.
Right.
And so that's super helpful.
Yeah. I think a great example, what always comes to mind for me, and I'm hoping so you can tell us a little bit more about that, is how, I mean, I'm glad that you brought up the blue and yellow signs because they are so generally incorrect. Yet, of course, and it's fine and it makes sense that obviously visitors to the street would expect them to be accurate.
Yes.
But they are very old, and we keep them kind of as artifacts themselves.
Absolutely.
And at least on the tours, we make sure we let people know that they're not accurate. Mm-hmm. But I think a great example of what you're talking about is particularly at the Jean Hasbrouck House. Mm-hmm. So can you tell us a little bit about how, the blue and yellow sign gives a certain year that they believe the house was built, and now we know it to be different because of more modern technology and things like that?
Absolutely. That's usually, if people don't bring up the cellar on the Bevere Elting mm-hmm. House portion of the tour, later I definitely do in front of the Jean Hasbrouck House. Mm-hmm. So the blue and yellow sign says that the house was built in 1712 by Jean Hasbrouck. Mm-hmm. That is inaccurate mm-hmm. because we did dendrochronology, which is tree dating, mm-hmm. to a beam in the cellar that it was actually cut down in 1678.
Wow.
So that is the founding of New Paltz year.
You're right.
So
yeah.
that is, amazing. Mm-hmm. It's very unlikely that tree would have been cut down and then saved. So
right, for over 30 years.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So they would have used it immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And so that suggests that a house was built on that property, and then the house was added to and renovated in the fashion that we see today.
That makes sense.
Jean actually passes away in 1714. And okay. in his will, we know that the house and the land go to his son Jacob Sr. And so Jacob Sr. is actually the one who builds the house that stands today, and it was built in about 1721 or 1722.
I see.
And so what I like to say with the blue and yellow signs is, like you were saying, is that they're historic artifacts in themselves.
Totally.
They were erected around the entire United States in the 1930s as a result of the New Deal. And mm-hmm. so, they were a way to create jobs, and that did the job. That was amazing. Mm-hmm. It brought more history to light with national parks and all that kind of movement. And so that was super important, but either one of two things happened. Either they didn't do a whole lot of research themselves in 1935, right. Or I like to say the better answer is that research has certainly changed in the last almost 100 years. We're talking about that Paula Wheeler Carlo's book was written 12 years ago, and more research has been done. Mm-hmm. So of course it's been different over the last almost 100.
Yeah. You're right. The research just probably wasn't there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it shows, how much history evolves. Mm-hmm. And that's really heartening. That's really heartwarming, rather, for history majors today.
Yeah, totally. You'll never run out of things to do. I'm assuming you also get asked about the cockfights in the Abe Hasbrouck House.
Occasionally.
That one's kind of a pity. Just to clarify for listeners, the blue and yellow sign outside of the Abraham Hasbrouck House says that cockfights
were done
took place in the cellar. We have no evidence of that, but apparently in the 1930s they were
convinced.
They were pretty sure enough to put it on a sign. Great. So yeah, I mean it's so interesting how much this evolves. So obviously this year we have an entirely new structure, the Wigwam.
The best.
I know. I love it. How is that changing our tours and our current presentation of the Esopus Muncie history?
Right. So I think it's important to note that, last year and years prior, I've only been here for a little over a year now myself.
Sure.
But, even last year we were still talking about, the Native American people that were here. Mm-hmm. This isn't the first time we're
Right.
bringing this up, even though the wigwam is going to be the coolest thing ever.
Right. Yeah, no, because we used to have an archaeology exhibit that lived in the fort for many, many years until just very recently.
Right. And that some of those artifacts were actually put in the Bevere Elting House in 2016, along with 2 window screens. And so one of those window
I love
screens,
those too. They're so beautiful.
right? They're really done really well. One of the screens depicts a full landscape of what we think the Native American landscape looked like prior to European contact. And so the screen has a depiction of a wigwam, the mountain ridges in the background, and it depicts some of the crops that the Native Americans would have grown, such as what's called the 3 sisters, which is corn, or maize, beans, and squash. And so now instead of telling that story inside of a colonial house, even though the screen and the artifacts is so critical in terms of visual representation of those stories, it's going to be even cooler and even an enhanced experience to be able to start the tour in the space that would have existed prior to European contact.
Right.
And so here is, we're really enhancing that story. And so the tour will start in the wigwam with the story of the Native Americans who were here, the Munsee people, and then moving into the Bevere house and saying, so the wigwam we were just at, here is a full depiction of that landscape. And so, we can kind of still tell what we were saying in the Bevere Elting House in 2016, and make it, make it more.
Yeah.
Always adding to it. We can talk about the person who constructed the wigwam, Barry Keegan, who has been, almost like an honorary member of our staff in the last couple months.
Right.
And how we've been in communication with the Munsee people that live in Wisconsin today.
Right.
Their historian has been a super big impact on what we've been doing and saying in our 2017 tour. So I think that the tour will be more enhancing all of the senses, including the Native American story.
Right. And I think that you make another good point, which is the kind of collaboration that takes place to develop these tours. If people possibly think that we just do all the research and write them ourselves, I mean, for the most part, that is our responsibility, but we do have a scholarly advisory board.
Yes.
And, we consult experts regularly to make sure that everything is entirely accurate.
Absolutely. What I would hate to happen is someone to come on our tour and a tour guide fail to mention the fact that we were in communication with the people who can trace their ancestry back to this specific area, the people who haven't died out, the people who are still very much alive.
Well, yeah.
And so, because we have that collaboration, we want to make sure that we're not, quote unquote, like whitewashing history.
Right. Exactly.
I don't want to be the typical, the stereotypical white person telling another culture's history, without being as culturally sensitive as possible.
Right. Like, this wigwam is not a caricature. This is as authentic a replica as it can be. And we're serious about being as accurate as possible in that interpretation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So another thing that's changing on the tour this year, people may remember hearing that last year we were raising money to replace the Gene Hasbrook house roof. The Gene Hasbrook house is a pretty, iconic house on the street. It's the one right behind the monument. But But since we raised that money to replace the roof, that house will be under construction this year, and will not be available for tours. So how is that going to change the tour?
It'll be sad to see it offline for a little bit. I think that's one of the houses, like you said, is best well known.
Yeah.
It's right behind the monument. It's what you come up to when you come up North Front Street. It was the first house that the early society that later became the museum purchased.
Right, it was like a museum while people were still living in it, right?
Yes.
Like early 20th century, it was the first museum house. Yeah.
Even into the 1960s, we had someone come in during Haunted last year, just casually told us about how she was living in the Jean Hasbrook house in the 1960s and would have to come to the door to whomever knocked and would show them around the house.
Oh my gosh, right. I remember that. Yeah.
So that was super cool to hear. But not having the Jean Hasbrook house for a period of time, we have elongated the story within the Bevere Elting house. So the tour path last year in 2016 started at the Bevere Elting house, went to our 1717 French church, then the Jean Hasbrook house, and then the Deo house. This year, we'll start the Wigwam, which will be great. And then we'll go to the Bevere Elting house. And the Bevere Elting house has such an interesting story because it was built in 3 parts.
Right.
And its name alone suggests this kind of evolution of the Beveres built it and lived there first, and then the Eltings do. And so there's plenty of stories we can tell in there too. So in 2016, we were not in there very long. And this year, we're in there a little bit longer, and we're talking a little bit more about the Elting family, specifically a man named Roloff Elting, who ran the first store on Huguenot Street.
I love his story. Yeah, that's great.
His story is super gossipy, so I'm very excited to tell that to visitors this year.
Yeah, well, I mean, when I first heard it, I was like, how is this real?
Yeah.
How did this really happen?
So his story is super interesting, and we've moved some of the pieces from the Jean Hasbrook house to the Bevere Elting house, so that people can still see those kinds of pieces during the colonial times, and even through the American Revolution.
Nice.
So that's a fuller story in one house now. And then we'll still go to the French church, and then as we pass by the Jean Hasbrook house, instead of just ignoring this memorial house, we're still gonna talk about the building of the house and who lived there, and the quick version of what we would have said in 2016. But one of the things we really want to mention is the roof project, especially if, let's say, someone is working on the roof currently.
Yeah, that would be excellent.
It might be a little strange if the tour doesn't acknowledge someone hanging out on our roof.
The builders on the historic roof, yes.
So it'd be really cool to say the pieces that look like today's shingles that are on that roof, they're actually called shakes. And so we're cedar shakes. And so we're hoping to have an old cedar shake and a new cedar shake for people to actually handle, so that they can, have another sensory experience and feel that kind of texture and like what the roof is actually made out of, and how what we're doing is helping preserve the house in the most historically accurate way, while still still fixing the roof.
Yeah.
So the tour will still be the advertised, about 90 minutes. And so we're not ignoring it completely.
Right.
And hopefully the Jean Hasbrook house will be back.
Yeah.
ASAP.
Yeah, definitely. No, but I mean, in the meantime, that sounds like a great compromise. It makes a lot of sense. Definitely.
Yeah, making it work.
Definitely, yeah. Right now we're going to take a quick break. This is WFNP The Edge. Hi, and welcome back. You're listening to Historic Huguenot Street's weekly program on WFNP The Edge. I'm Kaitlin Gallucci, and I'm speaking to Historic Huguenot Street's guest experience coordinator, Courtney Russo, about Huguenot Street's new tours this year. So, in addition to the changes to the general tour that we were speaking about before the break, and those tours will begin on May 6th, we also have the second run of our new monthly Women's History Tour coming up later this month on April 30th. We talked a bit about this on the show last month, but as a refresher, Courtney, can you tell us a bit about that tour?
Sure. So the Women's History Tour was created in the 100th anniversary of women getting the right to vote in New York State. We launched it last month in March for Women's History Month, so really trying to hammer down all those anniversaries.
Yeah.
And the tour will be held once a month throughout the season. So
great.
in April, it'll be on April 30th. In May, it'll be on Mother's Day.
That's nice, yeah.
And so forth. So the tour is about an hour and a half or so. And it goes through some of the Hudson Valley women throughout time, really. And so we start with a Native American woman who actually signed our 1677 Indian deed that we actually have in our collection. That's a big part of how we start our our typical guided tour during the season,
Right.
but really highlighting the life of a Native American woman. A Native American woman had many more rights than European women did during that time period. So much so that later Native American women were actually looked to when the women's suffragette movement was happening.
Oh,
because
wow.
they looked to the Native American women and said, you get to be involved in peace treaties. You get to be involved in voting on and choosing a male sachem. You get to be respected. How do I get that?
Right.
Wow. And so, they were really influential. And then we kind of move through history with a very detailed and complicated oral history from a woman named Catherine Blanchard. The rumor has it she was captured by the Esopus.
That's another one of those unbelievable stories.
And there's so many different versions to that story. That one was pretty difficult
I bet.
to write, to say, but it's got some cute quirks. And then, like I said, we move through time, colonial times, and enslaved African women on the street, and we move through the suffragette movement. So we go through the last one we talk about is Mary Jane Snyder, who was the first woman to vote in New Paltz.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So it's the cool thing about the women's tour is that while we wanted to be historically accurate as possible in what the guide says, we also did a lot of creative writing through this tour too, because we created monologues for these women to help them come to life. And so in March, all of those monologues that were written were actually pre-recorded by HHS staff and volunteers, and they were played on the iPad that was held by the guide. And we're hoping that to add something different to each month, that possibly someone would be able to play those roles.
Oh, that would be neat.
And so instead of hearing Vincia Hasbrook's monologue via the iPad, when you go into the Abraham Hasbrook house, you would actually get to meet Vincia. And so that'll be a way to kind of switch it up a little bit, so that people do want to come back and go on this tour. The Women's History Tour in March sold out. And so much so that we had to turn people away.
Right.
So I'm really hoping that people see this as a really cool opportunity to not only get some of the history of Huguenot Street, but also these creative stories as well. So,
yeah, definitely.
Looking forward to April.
Great. That's a good point too. As you mentioned, that tour did sell out the last month. So I'll remind people that registration is already open on huguenotstreet.org for every month's tour. So say if you don't want to go on April 30th, but you know you want to take it later in the year, you can register for any date of the tour right now. And I guess the sooner the better, so you don't get turned away by Courtney.
Yes, and I'm really looking forward to holding the Mother's Day one, because it's a little bit sweet. It's a little bit later in the afternoon. I think it's at like 2 or 3 in the afternoon, and I'm hoping people will go to brunch, have their cute little Mother's Day time, and then take their moms to
it's such a great idea.
Or the women in their important women in their life.
Yeah, exactly.
On this tour. So.
Yeah, that'll be wonderful. That was a good idea. Well, Courtney, thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome. Happy to be here.
Once again, the Wigwam is currently under construction. You can see it in progress in person now on Huguenot Street, or you can follow Historic Huguenot Street on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram to follow its progress. And join us on opening day on Saturday, May 6th to take one of our first guided tours in the Wigwam. If you're particularly eager, we are hosting a fundraiser, our spring celebration in honor of the Munsee on April 29th, where you can have an exclusive preview of the Wigwam. Barry Keegan, the Munsee Native American crafts expert and museum consultant, will be on hand to talk about its construction. In addition, Bonnie Hartley, a Stockbridge Munsee Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, will speak at the event. We'll also have on display the original 1677 land deed carrying the marks of 5 Esopus signers, their 23 witnesses, along with the signatures of the 12 Huguenot patentees and their 16 witnesses, as well as Sir Edmund Andros, the governor of New York. An accompanying exhibit will showcase Esopus Munsee artifacts found during the decades-long archaeological study conducted in partnership with SUNY New Paltz and led by anthropologist Dr. Joseph Diamond. You've probably seen them doing their archaeological digs on Huguenot Street every July. If you'd like to register for the spring celebration, you can do so now at huguenotstreet.org/spring celebration. Otherwise, we hope to see you on opening day or at one of our many summer events, which we'll talk more about next week. We're wrapping up now, but listeners can tune in, well, I was going to say every Thursday, but next week is our last show of the semester. So you can tune in Thursdays while school is in session at 7:30 p.m. At WFNP.org or 88.7 FM to hear more from Historic Huguenot Street. Visit huguenotstreet.org for information on all of our upcoming events. You can also follow us on social media and sign up for our email list to stay informed on what's happening on the street. And if you ever want to catch up on any of our past radio shows, most of them are available on our YouTube channel. Thanks for listening.